Hello, fellow ink drinkers, and welcome back to the Blind Girls Book Talk podcast. My name is Aria.
And I'm Belle.
And we are two legally blind sisters who love reading and love books. And so what we've done is we've created this show in order to talk about it. We talk about what we love about books, what we wish we could change, all of that kind of stuff. This show is a variety show, so we cover a wide range of bookish content, and that can range from bad retellings of stories, book to movie adaptation comparisons, buddy reads, recent reads, bookish challenges. Really, the list goes on and on. But today what we are going to be doing is we are going to be doing one of our book to movie adaptation comparisons, and we are going to be covering The Book Thief today. Now, The Book Thief is one of my favorite books. Belle is also a very big fan. I think I read it when I was in high school or college, somewhere in that time range. And I loved it. I fell in love. It was really, really good. Before we get more into everything, though, just a warning, we're going to be talking about both the book and the movie. So there are going to be spoilers. Fair warning. But I wanted to cover that now because one of my favorite things about this book is the perspective of who is telling the story. For me, I thought that was really, really cool, and I don't want to spoil that too much if you haven't read it, just because it's really neat to have that different perspective, or that's what I think personally. So what we're going to do is we're going to have Belle give a little bit of a synopsis of the book, and then I'm going to talk about the movie.
Okay.
So,
was not prepared for this, but okay. So spoilers now. Spoilers for the book. Pretty much, the story is told through the perspective of death.
Yes.
And it tells the story of a young girl. Shoot, what's her name?
Liesel.
For some reason, I was about to say Leslie, and I'm like, that is definitely not
You're close. You're close.
But it follows the story of Liesel, and Death talks about when he first met her, and then also goes on to talk about her life through Nazi Germany, World War II time frame. And so it starts on the book with Death first meeting her when she was a young girl on a train, and her brother died, so he came to take her brother, and there he met her. And then he kind of just goes on about her meeting her new family. He talks about her and her best friend, Rudy. And it does talk a lot about Nazi Germany.
Yes.
I will say that, so if that's not something you like.
This is set during the time of the Holocaust and all of the horribleness that happened during those times.
Yes. And then it does talk about how her family then took in a Jew, and it talks about them hiding him in his basement, and, you know, it goes on and on kind of about that, and eventually you get to where she becomes technically the book thief. She learns to read and then loves to read, and it's the mayor's library. She's delivering laundry to the mayor's house for her adoptive mother, and she sees the library and ends up, doesn't she like sneak in through a window?
She does at one point, but that's not till later on, I think.
Well, in the book, I think that's like the first.
See, I forget, and I meant to look this up.
So she sneaks into a window and takes a book, reads the book. She does return it, though, but she does steal a book. And then eventually the mayor's wife catches on to what she's doing. She's not mad about it, but she leaves a note for Liesel that says pretty much like, next time you can use the door. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm honored to share my library with you. Next time, though, you can use the door. You don't have to be like a thief. So, you know, that happens. And then whenever the book burning, there's a scene then later on where they're burning a bunch of books. Soldiers are burning, what is it, books by Jewish authors?
Yeah, it's of the time, they burned things that were by Jewish authors. They burned things that they considered propaganda, anything and everything that didn't adhere to
their strict government standards.
Yes. Yeah.
So, she then she finds a book that is slightly burned, but still readable. So she ends up then stealing that book. And then eventually through the Jew that her parents hide, his name is Max, he then teaches her kind of to write her own stories. So then, I think he writes a story for her. And, and then she starts writing. Max gets caught. He's gone. Other stuff happens. And then a bomb gets dropped on her town. And she was in the basement of her house writing. And the bomb dropped and it killed all of her family. It killed her best friend and his family, all except for his father. And, Death then talks about that and how when he picked up the spirit of Rudy, he always was in love with Liesel and he was always asking her for a kiss. And once she realizes he's dead, she does give him a kiss, and Death talks about how his spirit was happy for that. And then kind of a time skip, right?
Yeah, it becomes a lot more vague at that point.
Yeah, it becomes a lot more vague. Death talks about how, he kind of lost track of her, but he does talk that Liesel then started working for Rudy's father in his tailor shop, and eventually, once the war was over, Max ends up finding Liesel again, and they're reunited. And then, it gets kind of more vague. He really lost track of her. She got married, had kids, that type of thing. But he does talk about kind of how she changed him in a way, and, how he enjoyed getting her soul and spirit and, walking past places with her and that type of thing. But I remember my favorite part of the book was, even though the story is told through Death, you get nice little, Death snippet notes. And I always found those to be interesting because some of them would be it's amazing how stupid human beings are. Or I remember the one was about Rudy and said, there's nothing worse than a boy who loves you, or something like that.
I think my favorite of those was the humans, so much good, so much evil, just add water.
Yeah, that one was a funny one. I always enjoyed those.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a pretty good synopsis. There's a couple things that I can maybe clarify when I get to them in my notes, because let me tell you, I watched the movie and I have many, many notes because, quite frankly, this is probably one of the worst adaptations that I have seen.
So me and Arya both love the book. It's not my favorite of Markus Zusak books, but it is the first book of his that I read, and I did love it. And so when the movie came out, our mother bought me for Easter the movie, and I have boycotted this movie.
Yeah, there's a reason, because my first note in my notes is, overall, this is a perfect example as to why movie adaptations get such a bad rap. This is a prime example of it, because let me tell you. Okay. So the first thing that I have to say about it is the opening intro from Death. Okay. And pretty much the way that the movie opens is kind of, they have the narrator who is Death, and it kind of zooms in on the train and on Liesel and her brother traveling. Okay. Now this intro is nothing like the book from my memory. You know how in the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie, the remake, not the one with Gene Wilder, the other one?
The Johnny Depp?
Yes.
Okay, yeah.
So you know how in the beginning there's a narrator who's kind of talking about stuff? Mm-hmm. The narration from Death sounds like it is kind of like the Willy Wonka narration. It's that kind of style of narration, which does not fit Death at all.
No, because the whole point I shouldn't say the whole point of the book because it's not the whole point of the book, but like something that made the book what it was that death was telling a story.
Yeah, and it wasn't like that. Like, it was very much, it had that vibe of how the Charlie and the Chocolate Factory movie opens and that narrator is talking, and it didn't, to my recollection, now granted, I did not look to like double check and make sure, but I've read The Book Thief like probably 3 or 4 times now, so I feel pretty confident in, my recollection of it. But pretty much the opening was nothing like the opening in the book. Like, they didn't use any of how death explains things when they could have. And it really, really made me angry because it was a totally different vibe. It did not gel. So the next thing is that when she gets to her adoptive family's house and she's in the car and the lady is like trying to get her out, and I think her adoptive mom comes over to try to get her out, and then her adoptive dad doesn't he like gently be like, come on out, essentially?
Yeah, in the book, he's the gentle one to kind of coax her out, like nobody's gonna hurt you, that type of thing.
Yeah, so when he comes over, like they start with that, like the adoption lady is like, come on out. She doesn't. The mom walks over. She's like, come on out. She doesn't. And she's just like, she's stupid. And which, I mean, that fits the character. So even if it's not exact, fine. I'm not mad at it. Then he walks over and he says, Your Majesty. And it gets her out of the car. He never once ever in that book called her Majesty. So I'm so
he did give her like pet names throughout the book, but never was it that.
No, it wasn't. Like, and angry. So then the next thing that he does is, I think it's after she gets in the house, and the layout of the house is different than I pictured it in my head, but whatever, that's fine. I can live with that. He takes her up to her room, and then he shows her a magic trick where he's like, he has something in his hand and he like puts his hands down and he's like, okay, what hand's it under? And he switched the hands or something like that. And he shows her this magic trick. And I'm like, that was never a single thing in the book ever.
No, I mean, I think he did do like the coin trick, if I remember correctly. Like he did the coin trick, but like that wasn't till later, because like the first thing they do when she arrives is they give her a bath.
Yeah, that's not in there.
And like the father has to like help calm her down because the adoptive mother is like freaking her out and yelling at her. And
now, also, do you remember, does the adoptive father, his name is Hans, does he have terms of endearment for his wife?
I think he had one.
Okay.
If I remember correctly. But don't take my word 100% for it, because it has been years.
Okay, because he was like very, very loving towards her in this.
No, but they weren't really in the book.
They were, but like
they were loving, but they weren't like a lovey-dovey couple.
Like, it was more like, I feel like they cranked up like the love between them a little bit more.
Because like in the book, it wasn't like they didn't love each other. But in the book, it was more so they fit together because they balanced each other out. The wife was mean and rude, and Hans was...
Well, let me tell you,
nice
they dialed her down a lot. She is not nearly as abrasive in the movie as she is in the book.
Oh, but that's what made her character.
Yeah, no, they dialed her down. Like, she was strict, but she wasn't like in your face how she was in the book.
Well, okay, here's my question. I remember in the book, her mother called Liesel, like Dirty Pig?
Yeah, essentially.
In German. Like, it was in German.
I can never say it, but yes, that did show up. However, they didn't really explain it that well, and it didn't show up a lot. And Rudy, how there's like the girl version and the boy version, like the boy version is Zauker. Mm-hmm. That I feel like shows up more than the other does. Than hers, that I can't say, because I always say the name for Outlander, the term of endearment.
Because that's how it's spelled in Germany, but that is not how it's... So the spelling for Sassenach in Outlander is the same spelling as this word in German, but it is not pronounced the same and does not mean the same thing.
Right. Yeah, it's completely different. But anyway, so then another thing is that they have Liesel singing to herself, like all the time.
Never happens.
And that never happens. So I'm just like, excuse me? Then, at one point in time, I forget what this is in reference to, but apparently Rudy just kind of shows up at their house and just kind of comes over, which he never does in the book. They always kind of meet out on the street and they do their own things and they run about town. And like, yeah, they're like, I think they're next door neighbors. Yeah, they're next door neighbors.
They're next door neighbors.
So like, he's kind of there, but like in this, he's very much like, oh, hi guys. Like, and it's like, nope, that doesn't happen.
No.
And then like when they first meet, their first meeting in the movie is really weird to me, and I don't know why, but something is off about it. And like they're walking down the street and Rudy's talking to her, and then all of a sudden she just kind of spits in the street, and he's like, okay, 1 spit for yes, 2 spits for no. And then he starts asking her questions because like she doesn't want to talk to him, and I'm like, that didn't happen. And then there's a whole conversation where essentially Rudy's like, I think you need a friend, because I think she's like, why are you talking to me? And he's like, because I think you need a friend. And I'm like, that never happens.
No, that never happens, because pretty much in the book, Liesel's by herself, and then Rudy just kind of eventually just attaches himself to her.
Yes.
That is legit the best way to describe it.
Yes. And then there's a part 2, I think that this is when she's talking to Rudy, where she's saying that she's going to run away and she's going to run back to her mom, like her birth mother. And I was like, I don't think that's a thing. Like, I think there might have been a little bit like she misses her mom, but like, I don't remember her being like, oh, I'm going back to my mom. Okay, so then you remember that, so a big part in the book in the beginning is that Liesel has nightmares and she'll wet herself, and her adoptive father Hans is the one that kind of comes in. He helps her clean up and everything, and then he kind of sits with her and talks with her or plays his accordion or something, like to help her calm down until she goes back to sleep, right? There is none of that in the movie. Not a single, there's not a thing where she's like, she's having nightmares and he's coming to talk, like to comfort her. Like there's no, like, there's none of that, which, okay, fine. Like I can see why they might not want to put the peeing the bed, but like.
But still, the nightmares were a big part of the book, because the nightmares were about her brother's death.
Yeah, no, they aren't there. Instead, what they do is she has the first book that she steals, which is the Gravedigger's Handbook.
Yeah.
And she has that, and she has a picture of her brother in it. And Hans kind of looks at the book and he's like, well, this isn't the reading material for a young girl. And she's like, no, it was my brother's, even though like one of the gravediggers dropped it, you know, when they were burying her brother, and she stole it.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, that's how she comes into possession of this book. And so then they have this conversation about her brother, and I'm like, but that didn't really happen.
No, they don't ever speak of
no,
her
but
brother.
they're like talking about him and talking about his name and like everything, and she's
in
like,
the book, he's not even named.
yeah, they're talking about it, and I'm just like, this is nothing. Like, it's not, you know, it's just like this conversation. And then she's like, well, can you teach me how to read? And that kind of, and Hans is like, okay, yeah, sure. You know, I'm not good at it either, but we'll work on it together. And that tracks with the book. So I'm like, okay, but like everything leading up to that doesn't. And then he teaches her to read in the basement, and he doesn't read it to her. So in the movie, he's like reading it to her, which doesn't happen. And they're doing it in her bedroom, which is on the second floor, not in the basement. Like they always went to the basement to do stuff. So I'm just like, excuse me.
I didn't even think in the book the house was. The house had a basement, but it was just one floor.
That's what I thought too. But I was like, okay, fine. Like you need a second floor.
Yeah, you want to do that? Okay, fine. But
I can accept that. But
yeah.
that was another one of my notes. Like, well, I already said the house is not how I pictured it.
No, because remember in the book, because her room is right next to the door in the basement. Because whenever Max is with them and the soldiers go down to check to see if the basement's deep enough to survive a bombing, and she's like freaking out, and she's just sitting in her room trying to appear calm, and she's like just kind of watching her door for them.
Yeah. So then we hit to the point where we first meet Max. And they're showing kind of the destruction of, the Jewish people being rounded up and taken away, which, okay, fair. I understand why. But then they have this thing where Max and his mom are like standing in a house or a building of some kind. And some soldier comes in and is just like, okay, I'm going to get you out, but I can only take one. And Max's mom is like, okay, go, like, you know who to go to. And Max is like, but I'm not leaving you. And she's like, no, you have to go. And I'm like, but that doesn't happen.
No, because even when Max explains his, like, what happened to Liesel in the book, he wasn't even with his mother. He was with some friends.
Yeah.
And, he learned that Hans would help. Yeah. So he came and sought Hans.
Well, let me tell you. And then Death does this thing where he's just like, one of Max's biggest regrets in his life was leaving his mother that night or something like that. And I'm like, but that doesn't happen.
But it doesn't. So wait, does Death give any of his good little notes?
No.
Oh,
Death is like barely used.
That's bullcrap, because legit there are so many good little quotes from Death to just add Death commentary that I feel like they could have like used some of them.
Oh, no, they didn't use them. They barely used it. Okay, so Hans's job is a painter. That's what he does, and he paints houses. And so they're walking down the street one day, and he's scraping off like some paint from a sign or something like that. And they're asking him what he's doing or something. Or Rudy, I think, is like, aren't you a painter? And he's like, well, the scraping off business is picking up, Rudy. And I'm just like, that never happened, excuse you. That's not a thing. So then the next biggest egregious problem is that, so one day Hans is like, Liesel, I have a surprise for you. And he takes her down to the basement, and it's painted like a chalkboard. And it has where she can write the words under like A, B, C, D, E, which is similar, but like they do it together. It's not something where he's like, oh, this is, this is this. And they do the whole thing with paint. They don't do it with chalk. So like, yes, I know this is nitpicky, but like for me, I'm just like, but there's so many different changes to that.
Yeah, because it was just, they had like a little chalkboard and they do it in the kitchen while the mom was making dinner.
Yeah, until they moved downstairs and then they painted the wall, then she would write on the walls. But that's not a thing. There wasn't anything about her mom, Liesel's mom, being a communist from the other kids or about her burning a book. So this is at the book burning scene, and they have one of like the bully kids come over and be like, oh, your mom's a communist. You need to burn a book in order to prove that you're for the whatever.
Frau.
The Hitler.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, no, that's not a thing. And then wasn't the book that she pulled out of the fire something about a bird?
I think, yes.
Okay, yeah. She pulls the Invisible Man out of the fire. And I'm just like, that ain't it. So then it gets to the point where Max shows up. And essentially, Max shows up and then collapses, which I think might be accurate.
That's accurate, because he knocks on the door and collapses.
Yeah, and he collapses. And so then they put him up in the other bed on the second floor with Liesel. And then they're feeding.
Happen.
And then essentially, the one time the mom is trying to spoon feed Max soup, and she's like, see, somebody appreciates my cooking, and then all of a sudden he like throws it up, and I'm like, I don't remember. And like Hans and Liesel are just sitting there like staring at him, and I'm like, I don't think that happened like that.
No, because first he was placed in Liesel's room. Like they didn't have the room. But that scene of the food did not happen.
Yeah. So then it goes into her trying to go to the mayor's house. And in the book, at first, her mom goes with her to show her how to pick up the laundry from all the different people she picks up from, how to collect the money. Like, she shows her how to do it. And then she allows her, after a couple times, then she allows her to go on her own, but like, it like threatens her and is pretty much like, you know what to do. But like, the way that it goes straight to like the mayor is their only customer, essentially. Like, that's how they imply it. And she sends her by herself like the first time. And I'm just like, that doesn't happen that way. No. And then like when she gets to the mayor's house, the mayor is home along with the wife. And I'm like, normally the mayor's never home.
Yeah,
so
no,
like
the mayor's never home. And like, that's like kind of where the mayor's wife and Liesel connect. Oh, I forgot to mention in my synopsis of the book that after the bombing, once Liesel's family dies, she's the only survivor. Well, I should say the only child survivor.
She's like the only survivor of the town.
Yes. And so the mayor's wife, like the mayor and the wife survived because their house is like up on a hill, nowhere near. And so the mayor's wife finds out, and she then goes and asks to see the survivor and finds that it's Liesel. And then they adopt Liesel because the mayor's wife loves her.
Yeah. So then when she goes in, she drops off the laundry. I think a servant like gives her the money. And then the mayor's wife is like, "You like to read, don't you?" And Liesel kind of like nods her head and she's like, "Come on, I have something to show you." And she takes her directly to the library. And I'm just like, okay, that never happened. Then for a long time in the movie, Max is up in Liesel's room just chilling. And I thought he was moved to the basement pretty early on. Like, he gets there and then they kind of like they give him a little bit and then they move him down like pretty quickly.
Yeah, like they wait till he like gains his consciousness and gains some strength and then they move him.
Yeah, they don't do it that way. Like, it feels like it takes like a long time.
Because that's the whole reason that Max and Liesel connect quickly is because he gets moved to the basement and then like would ask her to describe the sky and the things that he couldn't see because he was stuck in the basement.
Right. Now, do you remember something about Dear Hitler? It might be between Max and Liesel.
The only thing that I can think that's kind of similar to that, like not in that vein, but the book that Max writes for Liesel. Because that book, it's not like Dear Hitler, blah, blah, blah. But it's a story. It's a story in which he talks kind of about
what happened. Yeah.
What happens, but like he never mentions it by name.
Yeah.
It's very vague, but like you can use context clues of the time and know that Max is writing about Hitler versus him.
Yeah. So pretty much they do this thing and I'm just like, I don't think this ever happened. Like, and it was such a weird conversation that I was just like, I don't understand, but okay. So then there's a thing where it makes her seem like she's like telling the mayor's wife that they're hiding a Jew, and like that she tells Rudy eventually that they're hiding a Jew. And like, I'm like, I don't think she ever was like, "Oh, we're hiding." Like, and it's like,
no.
What? Oh, the snowball fight in the basement. They do that in the movie and it is very cute. And I'm like, okay, fine. You did something right. Like, pat on the head movie, you did one thing right. Now, Hans and his wife do have biological children who are adults. And when it's Christmas time, they come over to visit. But like in this movie, they don't have kids. Like, that never happens. And then it gets to the point where Max gives her the book. However, Max doesn't write her a story. It is just his book. I think it's Mein Kampf that he was carrying with him, that he took paint and he painted the pages over and he just left it blank and is like, for you to write your stories. And I'm just like, excuse me, that's not a thing, but okay. There's a lot of time jumps in this movie that are huge, which I hated. Then when Max gets sick after they bring all the snow into the basement, there is a lot of time spent on him being sick, which I know that was a big deal in the book, but like they make it such a bigger deal in the movie. Then essentially Rudy finds the book that Max made Liesel, and he pretty much is like confronting Liesel. Well, who's Max? Is he your boyfriend? Like all of these things. And I'm just like, excuse me?
That does happen in the book, though. Like, he does kind of, not in that exact context.
Yeah, no, that's the exact context. Like, and if there was, like, I did forget about that, I will admit. Because it's like when he catches her sneaking out of the mayor's library, pretty much, he's just like, well, why didn't you steal food? And, like, it's this whole big fight. And I'm just like, I don't remember this being like this, but okay. So then when he jumps into the river to save the book, I think after that, he calls her the book thief, and she calls him a fish. And I'm just like, this, like, it's just so awkward, and it doesn't happen like that. And I'm just like, excuse me? The movie drug on from me. Like, I'm just making such random notes at that point. Oh, so then what they do is they enlist Hans in the war again, which Hans was never enlisted in this war, because he was too old. But they had him go to war. They had him get in a truck and then being like, oh, it must be really bad. We're getting all the grandpas back in. And then the car runs over a bomb and like flips over, and then Hans gets sent home. And I'm just like, excuse me, this never once ever happened.
No, that doesn't happen.
Never. He never leaves.
I know there was like, though in the book there is like talk of him leaving, but again, he's too old. Like he has to go like to the war office.
Yeah,
with like documentation or something. And like Liesel's kind of panicked about it, but he's old.
Yeah. No. They sent him off. And I was just like, excuse me, what? There's a part where Rudy and Liesel try to run away, which I think might happen. But then they go to the river and they scream, I hate Hitler. And I'm just kind of like, okay. I don't think about that. There's a point where they're sitting in the bomb shelter and Liesel starts telling a story to everybody to keep them calm because Hans isn't there to play the accordion. And I'm just like, I don't think that happens, but okay. So now we get to the end where everybody dies. And so there's so much I want to break down about this, and I'm going to try to make it quick. Essentially, Rudy gets pulled from the rubble and Liesel finds him, and he's like clinging to life and like kind of like dies in her arms, and then she kisses him. I'm like, no, this boy was dead from the beginning. Like, don't do this to me.
And nobody pulls him out. She kind of pulls him out herself in the book.
Yeah, no.
She goes hunting through the rubble for those she loves.
Yeah, no. They're pulled out at that point. And then like another thing, I didn't write this down, but like, you know how in the book, Death talks about Hans and Stoll and how he's one of the rare ones that stands up to meet him and is like, you know what I mean? Like it's that kind of thing. And it's like, he's a good soul.
Yeah.
In this, they're like, Hans's soul was as light as a child's. And I'm just like, excuse me, what? Excuse me, what? That's not how it goes. And so like, I'm sitting here during that part crying because I always cry at that part. And I'm just like, I'm looking at all these inconsistencies and I'm like, I can't. And my next note after this is like, thanks, I hate it.
Thanks, I hate it.
Thanks, I hate it. No humans, so much good, so much evil, just had water. Okay, so these are kind of my two final thought notes that I'm just going to read through. I feel like there could have been more death narration, and the narration they did use could have been closer to the book. Like the Haunted by Humans was accurate to the book and actually felt right, because that's like the way it ends. Like
I'm constantly haunted by humans.
Right.
I think
they use that at the end, and that is like the only part of it that feels right. Like of all of the death narration, which isn't much, that is the only part that feels right. And I said, I don't know who decided to change it all, but they made a huge mistake. There's a reason that certain books are popular, and it's not only the story or the characters, but specifically in this case, the words that were chosen. Say what you will about this book. I know some people don't like the circular writing in places, but this book to me is like poetry in prose, especially in the beginning at the end. So to take that and pretty much handicap it, I think it's shameful. And that's my personal opinion on the movie, because legitimately there are so many things that they could have made closer to the book that they didn't. Or if they did, I don't recollect it being that way because it didn't feel that way. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there's a certain feeling that book invokes.
That book
and it wasn't
flows.
there.
So, like,
it wasn't there.
The movie would be expected to flow.
And it wasn't there. Like I said, that ending, like the last monologue, which I think is the closest thing to the stuff in the book, like to how death closes out the book. That is the only thing that's somewhat accurate. And it felt right, but like nothing else did.
Okay.
I'm sorry. Like, I'm sorry, but like, like, even reading back my notes, I'm just so frustrated by this movie. Like, and I had a feeling I was going to be frustrated by it, but like to watch it and then just see everything that they did that they didn't necessarily have to change, but they changed it. I'm just like, dude, why? Like, you didn't have to. And that's my thing for people who are trying to adapt books. If you're trying to do it, try to keep at least some things close to the book. Well, that about does it for today's episode. Thank you for coming along and listening to me vent and listening to, us talk about The Book Thief. If you like this episode, if you like what you've been listening to, please consider sharing the episode with your friends. It would really help us to grow the show, and we would appreciate it. Now, what are we going to be talking about next time?
Next time, we will be doing the first sentence challenge.
Okay, so we will see you guys later. Bye.
Bye.